Hey y'all, so we are in the second half of this unit. Today we're talking about 4.6, how do US states spatially organize the government? Keep in mind that when it comes to AP courses, human geo included, it's very US centric. So even though we might be using some US examples today, a lot of these concepts and ideas and terms do include other countries as well, or just political geography in general. So we're continuing on explain the nature and function of international and internal boundaries. So in 4.5, we focused a little bit more on international boundaries. Today we're looking at internal boundaries using the US as examples. So overall, voting districts, redistricting, and gerrymandering affect election results at various scales. So overall, you'll be able to see that political boundaries and divisions of governance between states and within them reflect balances of power that have been negotiated or imposed. So some of these concepts here definitely reinforce that idea. So the census, this is an important term for y'all to know. I know we covered it in Unit 1 a bit. So what is it? Just as a reminder, this is something that in the US is done every 10 years. In other countries, it might be a different length of span or a different span of time. For the US, it's mandated by the Constitution, and it is really important because it allows that official population count, and it's not just for the number of people within a country. It's also information about age, race, sex, and so on. A lot of other important data. That data is then used to help determine federal and state funding, and that is essential to planning and providing services that are needed, such as building and maintaining infrastructure. So that includes schools, roads, waste management, hospitals, libraries, public transportation, and making sure that those services are enough for that population. If populations are increasing, that means that we might need more schools, we might need to expand roads. So the census really allows for that to happen and allocates how much funding should be in different areas of the country. The census also helps to reapportion the congressional map. So by congressional map, that just means the map that's used to dictate how many representatives that areas have within their government. Congressional map can also be applied to other places that have representative governments. So the process of reapportionment and redistricting in order to assure that each congressional district is roughly the same total population. So more or less, they want districts to be the same population, so that way one area is not overrepresented while other areas are underrepresented. So if a population in a specific congressional district decreases, they could lose their congressional seat. Conversely, if a population increases, the location could gain a congressional seat. So if we look at this example here, percentage of changes, we can see my state here, Texas, woohoo, with a growing population, which means that there needs to be more representation within government to make it proportional. So reapportionment, this is a process in which U.S. House of Representatives seats are reallocated to different states based on population change. So although we are using the U.S. House of Representatives as an example, keep in mind that reapportionment is just that process of making sure that there are the appropriate number of seats within government that represents that particular population and takes into account how that population might change over time. So this is the example in the U.S. using the U.S. House of Representatives. Electoral College, this is something that the U.S. uses as well as other countries. This is an organization that utilizes the popular vote and then vote for the president. So essentially, it's not a direct vote it's not popular vote for voting for the president. Instead, the whole population will vote, and then each area has an electoral college representative, and then that representative will vote in the way that that population would like. So it's almost the same thing. I guess technically they're not tied to voting the way that that population does, but essentially they always do. So if there's a loss of a congressional seat or if the population decreases, that means that they will have less representation in the electoral college, which means that there's less population to be considered. Redistricting, it's exactly how it sounds. So this is a state's internal political boundaries that determine voting districts for the U.S. House of Representatives and state legislature, or overall, the redrawing of political boundaries, the redrawing of voting districts to reflect the population and census data. So that's what we call redistricting. A voting district, this is a geographic term used by state and local governments to organize elections. So if you have a voting district, or depending on where you live, will determine what voting district you are part of. And this is drawn by state legislatures. So the people that are in power at the state level, they're the ones that draw these lines and determine where these voting districts are, who is in them, how large they are geographically, and so on. So we can see some examples of voting districts here. Requirements for voting districts. It needs to be similar in population size from one district to the next. You can see this in a few different ways. We have contiguous. These are single unbroken shapes. So this is contiguous here, even though this is a very odd shape, which we'll get to in just a slide or two. We also have compact. These are smooth rather than contorted boundaries and should cluster around a central core rather than dispersing outwards. So when it comes to dividing these voting districts, you're not going to have like perfect shapes. You are going to have kind of funny, maybe some odd looking shapes. Here are a couple of other examples. But overall, if it's a shape like this, unless there's potentially maybe a geographic feature like a body of water, that should not be the case typically, because it leads to something called gerrymandering here. And if you would really like to see me go off, then talk to me about gerrymandering in the state of Texas. So this is redistricting for a political advantage when the political party that controls a majority of seats in the state legislature draws political district boundaries to maintain or extend their political power. So in other words, it's when people who are in power, or the political party that's in power, they redraw the lines very strategically to where they will maintain that power, to where it's easier for them to be reelected. So we see this happening with both political parties in the US. Both the Republicans and the Democrats do this. And essentially, it does not allow for a true representation of what the population wants. There's a couple of ways that gerrymandering can look. So we have packing and cracking districts. So packing a district, this is clustering like-minded voters in a single district. And what this does, it allows the other party to win the remaining districts. So notice that these two images, the color of the houses are exactly the same in the same location, but where the lines are, that's the only difference. So in this situation here, we have packing a district where these people in blue are all put in the same district, so they easily win. But overall, even though there are blue houses in other areas, they are definitely the minority in those regions, right? We also have cracking a district. So this is dispersing like-minded voters across multiple districts in order to maximize their impact, minimize their impact and prevent them from gaining a majority. So notice, even though this breakdown is almost 50-50, depending on where these lines are, they might not have any representation or very little representation, to where when it comes to passing laws, it doesn't really make much of a difference. What we would like, right, or I guess in theory, what would be most appropriate and most democratic are representative districts. So this is which voting districts are equal in population. They are also contiguous and compact. They are truly representative of the people living in the district. So notice here that there's a much more even balance to the number of houses versus the number of districts that each party gets. So this, unfortunately, is not always the case because of gerrymandering. The results of gerrymandering are that election results at various scales will be impacted. National, state, and local are all impacted. And it makes you wonder whether elections are truly representative, and if that voting system is working and is actually democratic. So those were some of the main ideas for this unit, and let's